Well, hello. I'm Peter Isaacson, Chief Strategy Officer of Fair Observer. I have the exceptional privilege and honor today to be talking to Kanwal Sibal, the former Foreign Minister of India, and something that touches me particularly. He's also a former ambassador to France. I have two nationalities, American and French. I feel very privileged to be talking to someone who knows, I think, both of my cultures very well, because you were also ambassador to Washington at one point, I believe.
I was deputy chief of mission in Washington.
Right. Okay. So obviously, as a foreign minister, as a career diplomat, high-level diplomat, you know about many of the cultures, and especially the cultures that I know about, and many others as well. And culture is really one of the things I want to talk about today. But let's look at your experience and how you see the world at this point, which I think many of us consider to be a turning point. You've spent most of, I think, all of your career, we could say that, in a world that was originally the Cold War, a bipolar world that suddenly became unipolar in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed. And we saw the effect of the Washington Consensus becoming a rules-based international order, the rules being defined by the US primarily. The authority was vested in the US to announce what those rules were, although they were defined earlier. Anyway, you've been through the period of bipolarity, unipolarity, and I think, like everyone else who's aware of what's going on today, you believe, as I do, that we're moving into and may already be living in a multipolar world. I'd like to know your impressions about what that means across your whole career, how you experienced that.
Well, I have a view that the world was never really bipolar. That is a Cold War construct, and it is comfortable for the Western analysts to think about the East and West and the Soviet Union and the Western world, the clash between communism and democracy and all that. But they forget that a much larger number of countries were not aligned to either bloc. So did they form a bloc or they did not form a bloc? They may not have formed an alliance, but they had a sort of a ideological kind of bloc saying that we are going not to join either side. We are not going to join any alliances. Most of these countries had been colonized, and therefore there are reservations about the ex-colonial powers. In fact, the process of decolonization of Africa started occurring in the 1960s. So it was pretty late in the day. After all, the Second World War ended in 1945, and the Cold War began, let's say, in 1949 or whatever. And then they worked very well together in the United Nations on a variety of issues, including economic issues. The non-aligned movement was effective in terms of being courted by both sides. And there was a group of 77, largely consisting of non-aligned countries who were able to pull their weight in the UN on economic and other issues. Then, of course, came the unipolar world, quite rightly, when the Soviet Union collapsed, in the sense that United States had a field day in terms of seeking to change the world in accordance with its own thinking, ideology, and interests. And the first area on which they worked was to redefine the entire map of the Middle East, or West Asia, as we called it, with hindsight, the results that are quite disastrous. And then, of course, because of 9/11, the issue of terrorism came to the fore in a very, very big way. Then they launched the war on terror, which was not effective and which recoiled on the United States. And part of the problem that the United States is facing today in terms of diminished power is because of the failure of the war on terror and the failure of the policies in West Asia. Because you had more terrorism, you had the Islamic State, the countries that were militarily invaded or where action was taken remained very unstable and in fact became a prey to terrorism and violence and everything else. And Afghanistan was a very, very dramatic failure, as we saw. So in that sense, even as the United States was unipolar, the weakness of the United States were beginning to get exposed. And now, of course, they're very much more visible. Today, are we in a multipolar world? In some senses, very broadly speaking, one can say that. But, you know, multipolar world actually denotes that there is a central pole and around which a certain number of countries are attached. And then there are different poles which also have countries attached to them. Now, insofar as the United States is concerned, definitely there is a strong pole of the Euro-Atlantic pole. United States and Europe, they do constitute a pole, even if there are differences between the two, especially on economic issues. And in the case of France, even maybe in terms of foreign policy. But nevertheless, they are together and they work very, very well together in terms of shaping the international environment and preserving their dominant role in world affairs, which they have got used to for the last 300, 400, 500 years or whatever it is. Then attached to that is the alliance system outside the Euro-Atlantic alliance, where the United States has Japan and South Korea and Philippines as allies and what have you. Now, there it's not quite the same thing because the United States has influence and power, but it is challenged. It's beginning to get challenged there very effectively by China. It was not the case, let's say, 10, 12 years ago, but especially in the last 4 or 5 years. During the Trump presidency, it came out very much onto the open. China has now emerged as a challenge and is being talked about as a pole in a multipolar world. But China is not yet a pole. It has only 2 countries which are really friendly to it and which will go by what China says. One is Pakistan, the other is North Korea. Others, well, Cambodia and Laos are getting into their fold a little bit, but nevertheless, it's not in the same category as the other 2 countries, Pakistan and North Korea. And China, unlike the United States, has lot of partners,
yeah,
but no friends. But no friends. Although, mind you, they become pretty effective in the United Nations because they become the second largest contributor to the United Nations, and they're occupying the head of 3-4 bodies in the United Nations, and they're working the system very effectively in terms of garnering support behind themselves on various issues, as we have seen even on the Uyghur issue, where when the whole issue was brought before the UN Human Rights Council, and they sought to condemn China, the most conservative Muslim countries backed them.
Yes.
As if the Uyghur problem didn't exist, and that is because of the BRI and the economic and financial power China wields and projects they do, especially in the area of infrastructure, etc., etc. So they have economic interests involved. But there is no ideological affinity, people-to-people affinity, cultural affinity, because Chinese have a peculiar method of doing these things. And in many ways, they are a bit alien frankly, in terms of what the rest of the world, the manner in which it relates to them. They're opaque, they are non-transparent, their language is very, very difficult, their thought processes are very difficult to decipher. They speak in cliches and in formulaic terms, and then you have to spend time trying to read, okay, is there a change in comma or is it a change in word from what was said last time? And if there is, what does that mean? You know, that kind of a thing.
No.
But nevertheless, China is posing a challenge to the United States, but it's not yet a pole. Russia is a little more of a pole, although mind you, currently they are in great difficulty because of sanctions and this conflict in Ukraine. But there's a bit of they're more of a pole because they have the former Soviet states, especially Central Asian or even let's say Armenia, Azerbaijan, because they have intervened there and tried to resolve their difficulties. They have peacekeeping forces. So, and then they have old relationships in Africa. They still have pretty good influence in countries like Cuba and everything else. And you will see from the voting that took place in the United Nations, although very few voted along with Russia, but nevertheless, 10, 12 countries did. So, and then because of being a permanent member of the Security Council, a very formidable nuclear power and largest country in the world with tremendous resources at its command, unlike China. China is short of natural resources, but Russia is brimming with natural resources. And that gives them a certain degree of strength going forward, even if they are in trouble currently. So that's a bit of a pole, but not one which is in the same league as the Euro-Atlantic area. Now, India is talked about as a potential pole, but India has difficulty managing its neighborhood. I mean, one would imagine that countries like Nepal or Bhutan is very friendly, of course, but Bhutan also makes it a point to vote differently in the United Nations, just to assert their independence on various issues, including Ukraine conflict. And Bangladesh or Sri Lanka or Maldives, all these countries have played the China card against us because they fear our size and they feel vulnerable because they feel we may begin to control their domestic politics if they open the doors to us too much. So, and of course, we have this huge problem with Pakistan, which will do everything on heaven and earth to prevent us from playing our proper regional role, or for that matter, an international role.
And what about Tibet? It's not a country, but Tibet, culturally, in this configuration of influence and power, how would you situate Tibet in relationship to India? I mean,
we made a very serious geopolitical error because of romanticism and lack of experience, that we recognized Tibet as part of China in 1954. We just gave Tibet up. The Tibetans don't even use the Chinese language. Their language is very akin to Bengali. Their alphabet is the Sanskrit alphabet. Culturally, they are very close to us, very close to us. And of course, the Dalai Lama is there, and we've helped the Tibetan culture to survive. But we simply allowed China to take full control over Tibet, and they have militarized Tibet to such an extent that's unbelievable. I just wonder, what is the threat to Tibet? Where does it come from? India has no desire to destabilize Tibet. We neither have the power nor the inclination to do so. There is no, unlike Pakistan promoting terrorism to internally destabilize us, the Tibetans are utterly non-violent. There is no terrorism. On the contrary, out of frustration, they burn themselves. they incinerate themselves as a matter of protest and frustration. But they have militarized Tibet. And now they've sealed off Tibet through a variety of means. And as I'm told by my Tibetan friends, it is very, very difficult to maintain contacts with Tibetans internally from India. Because the moment some link is established, the Chinese at once come to know, because they have perfected these electronic systems and this and that. So I'm afraid Tibet is a bit of a lost case geopolitically. And after the Dalai Lama passes away, he's already quite old, then there'll be a tussle as to who would be the next Dalai Lama, the one which is incarnated through the ages of the present Dalai Lama, or one is set up by the Chinese state, Panchen Lama. And that'll be a big issue and will create a rift within the Tibetan community and as well as with India to some extent. And finally, what the Chinese have done by imposing the Han language, by the development in Tibet, they have created a core of Tibetans who see in their self-interest to benefit from the Chinese connection. So they have created, and because they are taught the Han language and they are made to think like Chinese, so there is a bit of a, how should I say, change in the thinking of these people, though the older generation still remains very attached to the Dalai Lama, etc., etc. So I think that is the case in the case of Tibet. Africa, the African Union is effective. The 55 countries which are members, they wield considerable influence within the United Nations when it comes to voting to certain bodies and to certain positions, because everybody wants the African Union to take a common position, and then your 55 votes are assured. But otherwise, Africa, barring some countries which are doing well and there's some economic resurgence, otherwise they're in bad shape, as you know, debt-driven. Some of the countries face serious issues of starvation, of food security, of water shortages, and there are also wars going on in that part of the world. So Africa is not in very good shape, barring some countries which are doing well. So they're not a pole that way, but they are being wooed by this side or that side. The Americans are now wooing the Africans in a very big way, because they have seen the kind of penetration China has made in Africa. And France is losing a lot of ground in Africa, because the Chinese are doing major projects, and they have the money, they have the resources. So Africa is being wooed, but it's not a pole. And Latin America is too far away from the center of things, and they are sort of a unit by itself. And long they've been dominated by the United States, and today United States, as they say, has a hand in the change of regimes. You know, if they're left regimes, then so they manipulate and get a rightist regime installed there, or if they, or like in Venezuela, if Chavez or Maduro are difficult, then they put them in their place or try to.
They try to.
But finally, one last point about multipolarity. There cannot be effective multipolarity unless something is done eventually about the hegemony of the dollar and the control of the United States on the US financial system. Can you imagine a peer nuclear state like Russia has been put on the ropes through the sanctions, through denial of technologies, through pressures put on other countries not to trade with Russia, and in general trying to knock them out of the international system. They haven't fully succeeded. But the point is, Russia is facing problems, and this is a lesson for other countries, that if you fall afoul of the United States, your foreign exchange, if you're put in the US treasuries, they can be confiscated. If they're in banks in the West, they can be confiscated. If you have gold in the UK, it can be confiscated. You will not be able to trade with other countries normally, despite the WTO regulations, things like that. So de-dollarization and breaking the link between petrol, oil, and the dollar would be critical if you're going to have genuine multipolarity.
But haven't the events you've just been describing, the sanctions, the embargoes, and so on, haven't they accelerated the movement towards de-dollarization? I mean, we heard Janet Yellen talking about it last week and reassuring Americans that the dollar would not be dethroned, and that's absolutely obvious. I would say, because there's some the habits are there. You evaluate everything in terms of dollars whenever you're doing business anywhere, even if you're trading in local currencies. You're still evaluating prices in dollars. But the mechanics of it are that if the treasury bonds are diminishing, the number of them that are out there, it's the American economy that suffers. And isn't that part of the decline of American power today? The fact that the dollar is, it's not being threatened existentially, but it is being diminished in its power. Wouldn't you say that?
Yes, of course, because I remember when BRICS was formed, and I had a hand in that. I was ambassador to Russia at that time. One of the things that were put on the table by Putin at that time was developing a BRICS currency and moving out of the dollar and trading in respective currencies and this and that. This has been a long plan, if you like, or aspiration of Russia and others, and now China very much, to move out of the dollar system. And with what is happening today in terms of sanctions on Russia and potential sanctions of China if it misbehaves, so there is certainly that threat. And I think the United States has done great damage to itself by using the financial weapon and the dollar weapon in the manner in which they have, because countries are going to draw lessons from this and shield themselves from being targeted themselves in the future. It'll be a slow process, but it is happening. Now, for example, you take the Asian AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Bank, which is essentially set up by China. It has now a portfolio which is bigger than the Asian Development Bank, and it is lending money to various countries for their projects. So this try to build an alternative to the World Bank system. So that also, in a sense, broadly speaking, dilutes the control that the United States has exercised through the international financial institutions on the global economy. The fact that today 80% of the trade between Russia and China is being done with yuan and rubles. It's a very significant thing, and this will grow even more in the future. We are also at the moment trying to develop mechanism by which we can trade with Russia in some kind of rupee-ruble arrangement, because we can't pay them in dollars. So what do? We paid them in dirhams in the UAE, through the UAE, but that is not a permanent or a durable solution. So we'll also have to think about this. And similarly, other countries will be facing this dilemma. So I think, in a sense, the United States has axed its own foot by taking some of these drastic decisions because of the Ukraine conflict, which will have long-term consequences down the road. Now, only issue is that if you don't have a dollar as the international reserve currency, and euro has not been able to effectively capture a very sizable portion of the global market trading in euros, although I think it's about 20% or maybe a little higher. The Japanese yen has not performed well at all. Now, the problem with yuan is, despite the strength of the Chinese economy, it's not freely convertible. It's not freely convertible. And I just read yesterday or today that a very big American investor who wanted to draw out money from his own dollar account, foreign exchange account in China, has been prevented from doing so. And he's warning other investors about the dangers of investment in China. So if you have a country, however powerful it may be economically, if its currency is not freely tradable, and also you do not know how their banking system functions, there's no transparency, it's very, very difficult to rely on that currency as a global one. So it'll take time, but steps are being taken in that direction to dilute the hegemony of the dollar, as they say.
Yes, it seems to me that going back to what you were saying earlier about multipolarity, and I think we can relate the de-dollarization question to it, is that we have a problem of vocabulary already. With you were explaining the question of poles, defining the poles, and our thinking is generally geographical, as you pointed out. You look at one region of the world, and is this a pole? Is it not a pole? Is it capable of building into a pole? But then you take the example of BRICS, which is spread out across 3 continents, if not 4. So when we talk about a multipolar world where there's an actor, an entity that we call BRICS, which is talking about having its own currency, right? Which, yes, as you said, it was Putin who initiated. I thought it was Lula who was the originator of that idea.
No. It was Putin very much. It was his agenda, and Lula. I in fact attended the first BRICS summit in Moscow. Lula was quite enthusiastic about BRICS, but no, the main motivation came from Russia, because Russia has weight and power. Is far more than that of Brazil, no?
So my question is, even people like yourself who really know all the issues here and all the parameters of it, when you use words like multipolarity or simply pole, we are not really clear about what we're talking about. But what we are clear about is that things are changing, that relationships are changing, that ideas about our resources themselves, and the currency is probably the essential resource of everything, our ideas are shifting. And that makes it difficult to talk about things coherently, right? It means that we need to engage in effort in changing our vocabulary or redefining our vocabulary. And wouldn't you see that as being the kind of essential shift, which I would call a shift towards chaos, that we're talking about when we talk about moving from a unipolar world to a multipolar world, rather than examining each pole? Think about how the concepts we use in relations are changing.
Yeah, you see, that is why, of course, the French were talking about the multipolar world. I remember when I was ambassador to France, Hubert Védrine talked about hyperpuissance of the United States and back the multipolar world. And that idea still remains in the French mind. In our own joint statements, whenever there are these visits at the highest level, there's always a reference to both countries support multipolarity and this and that. That is there. But now, as you know, some countries don't use the word multipolar. They'll call it a polycentric world or a multicentric world. Because then because the idea of a pole suggests that some people are going to go round and round that pole. but of course, that idea is there in the center also. I mean, if it's a multi-centric world, there's somebody at the center. And like the sun at the center, then the planets revolve around the center. So that is there, but it's very difficult to define what is really happening very clearly and rationally, not rationally, to find the right vocabulary for it. But everybody understands what's happening. That power has shifted remarkably, both political and economic and even military power from the West to the East. That fact is there. And now if political, economic, and military power shifts, it changes the balance in the international system. And when it changes the balance in the international system, then you can say that it is polycentric or what have you. That's the only way to sort of describe it. But I mean, the most acceptable and the easily assimilable concept would be that power has shifted from the West to the East. And then, so in that sense, the world is not the same as it was in 1945 or until recently. Yes.
50 years ago, the center of gravity of the global economy was in the North Atlantic.
Yes.
And now it's somewhere between Russia and India. People have studied how it's moving eastward. And obviously, it's the economy that has the biggest influence on the way power is perceived and used. My question then is given all these changes and the need, which I feel is to think about them in a different way and reformulate them. For example, I would say, and correct me if I'm wrong or if I'm going off in a direction that is unjustified, but we're talking instead of about poles and multipolarity, but a different distribution of power rather than concentration of power. That is, and that's a big problem when you talk about multipolar. When John Mearsheimer talks about multipolarity, he says it's anarchy. But is it possible to envisage a world in which power and influence are not exercised in the traditional way of control and manipulation? And we see that in the tools that the US has been using with the sanctions and embargoes and blockades and that kind of thing. So is it fair to think that the world could evolve towards something that is more like a distribution or a recognition of power, not necessarily in poles, but in centers?
That's already happened. But, you know, you mentioned that Mearsheimer, who I listened to, especially on this Ukraine conflict.
Yes, so do I.
Talking about, you know, the multipolarity sort of will mean chaos in the international system. I won't agree with that. The simple reason that the world has not been free from conflict, and very serious conflict, all these years. After all, you've had all these wars that we mentioned just now. We can go back even to the Korean War and the Vietnamese War, and Iraq, Libya, Syria, the Israeli-Palestine conflict. So there have been a lot of extremely serious problems that the world has been facing. Now, the problem is, why you are talking of, anybody is talking of chaos, is two reasons. One is the ineffectiveness of the United Nations system. If the United Nations was functioning as it was intended to function, then yes, there would be a kind of a huge conclave of the entire globe where issues get settled as best as possible. through a process of negotiations and through peaceful means. And if anybody is out of the line, then collectively judgments are made in order to bring that country or those forces into line by sanctioning legal use of force, which means with the consent of the international community. Now, that has not happened. That's not happened. And attached to that idea, to my mind, is there can be no multipolarity without multilateralism.
Absolutely.
Because when we talk about multipolarity, it should be cooperative multipolarity, not antagonistic multipolarity. Otherwise, instead of two countries fighting each other, then you have 10 countries fighting each other and trying to gain ground at the expense of another. That's not what multipolarity ought to mean. Or what really it means is that you take decisions collectively in the best interest of the international community, especially in the context of all the major challenges the world is facing today, including climate change and pollution and energy issues and what have you. But multilateralism is not working because the UN is not working. So to that extent, there is concern that about fragmentation of the international community. And if there's fragmentation and there's no overarching body which can then act as some kind of an arbiter in order to prevent conflict and war, or reduce as much as possible the consequences of conflict and war through positive cooperative thinking. If that is not there, then I'm afraid we are running into trouble, and the Ukraine conflict, in a sense, to my mind, symbolizes that.
Would you say that the idea of indivisible security is part of that, which people have talked about? In order to define it, we would have to go back to a framework like the United Nations. But the idea behind indivisible security is that people recognize the complementary security needs on either side. So that becomes the basis of addressing potential conflicts. Is that an idea you think has some legs? Can we do something with it?
Well, in terms of theory, this is what it should be. Yeah. That everybody should feel secure, and no country should actually, pursue policies in order to give itself maximum security, which de facto means at the cost of security of others, because maximum security means that you're going to face all challenges and you'll have the military means to defend your interests. Now, that is where the core of the problem about indivisible security is. If the United Nations were to work according to its charter to save the future generations from the scourge of war, which means that everybody will feel secure. And if any country takes upon itself to make X country insecure, then the international community will react. But human beings being what they are, human societies being what they are, and very often leadership is equated with protecting your country's interests, irrespective of the interests of others. And if you are a democracy and answerable to the public, then you have to prove that you are protecting your country's interests, even through wrong policies. But nevertheless, you feel that you owe it to your public to tell them that we are making you secure. Now, let me take another example just to bolster my point. Everybody agrees that a nuclear war cannot be fought and won. In fact, all the 5 nuclear powers have got together and said so formally. But what then explains Obama's decision to spend $1 trillion on modernization of US nuclear weapons? What explains Russia's demonstration of new, extremely powerful hypersonic weapons, underwater sea drones, and they've just now announced that they're going to operationalize their Sarmat missile, which is several times just more powerful than the most powerful US missile. China is increasing its nuclear weapon holdings. It is, you must have read it also, they are constructing 100 silos in some part of China to house their new missile. It's all being done in the name of security, because each country feels that it feels insecure vis-a-vis the other and wants to have a deterrent. Now, so long as you have a policy of deterrence, which means that you are threatened, then I'm afraid the whole concept of indivisible security will not work.
Yes, could it be that there's a problem of recognizing whether it's actually officially recognizing or acknowledging the existence of a hegemon, which is not the United Nations, that this becomes almost inevitable. My own theory, because I've lived through this as an American, is that we developed the military-industrial complex, which Dwight Eisenhower warned the nation and the world about, and it became such an essential part of the economy that the idea of not having and the belief that it was producing some kind of security because of deterrence meant that you had to continue with it. And hasn't that, I mean, can't we say that history has been marked in the last 70 years by the growth of this core of the economy, which has produced all the wonderful technology we have, including Zoom and all the rest, is that because of that, the power, the historical power of it, does it mean that we are condemned to keep living in a world where people think in terms of deterrence and think in terms of military capacity, and not just in terms of, not just because of security, but because of the health of the economy? Isn't that a major problem?
Well, yes and no. Of course, for the United States being the most powerful country in the world militarily, and having actually, in a sense, ever since 1945, organized the world according to its requirements and needs and ideology, the Washington Consensus you spoke about, the market economy, privatization, promotion of democracy, and later the human rights, everything else. Now, how do they sustain US hegemony? It is only through its military capacity. The US has such naval power, they can act at any point in the globe pretty quickly. Nobody comes closer to the capacity that the United States has in terms of its military. How many bases do they have? 190 bases? The figures are
closer to 800.
800, okay, 800 bases. Now, this is what gives them this hegemony, if you like. And now, why won't they want to lose that? Why won't they? They can't lose that, because once they start demilitarizing their economy and their whole society, then they lose their global power. They lose their global power. So, which means the standard of living that the United States has, and generally speaking, the power it enjoys globally, that will begin to be eroded very drastically. So I'm afraid it's very, very difficult for them to give up the power that the development of their military-industrial complex gives them. Now, the point is that if you're spending $780 billion on defense, so defense budget of the United States, then you have other problems which actually humanity is facing, and which can, however powerful you are, actually eventually, what should I say, destroy the entire fabric of your society. I'm talking about climate change, everything else. But when it comes to that, then there's no money available, even the $100 billion target per year in order to promote climate change and help the developing countries. Now, even when it comes to technology, renewables and everything else, it is not a it has become a commercial proposition.
Hmm.
In the sense you develop these technologies, you get an edge, your companies get an edge on others, and then you capture markets, then your shareholders are very happy. They get more and more money into their pockets. So even when there is collective interest involved, insofar as the humanity is concerned, if you think about these things idealistically, the attitude is not that. The attitude is to find ways and means to gain over others and to maintain your privileges and your power. Yes, the military-industrial complex has generated technologies like the internet and what have you, which have had major influence on society in general, and has revolutionized the way people relate to each other, etc., etc. But if you were to think about technologies that could be developed and motivated by some degree of collective well-being is theoretically possible. Now, even when you take these critical and emerging technologies, quantum computing, AI, and everything else, what is the big reason behind this is competition, insecurity, and domination. Mm-hmm. Because China is developing quantum satellites, so the encryption can be such that you can't decrypt what their communications are. In 5G, 6G, they made tremendous advances, and therefore the fear that they will capture the global market and set standards and gain a lead over others. So all these things, these technologies which can, and artificial intelligence for that matter, so all these technologies which can actually, in many ways, make your life better, are also become very much involved in competition and seeking advantage over others. In other words, more a question of, I won't say military conflict, but conflict. That yes. You are not going to go ahead of me because I am going to do something to make sure that I am ahead of you. So that's where it is.
It's a culture of competition, and competition always trumps cooperation in that kind of culture. I mean, that's how we were raised. That's how I was raised in the U.S. To think that this is the natural law of the world and of humanity. I'm not convinced that it is, which is why one of the reasons many of us in the West are reaching out to cultures such as Indian culture, where that was not the dominant principle that defined how society will work. In fact, most of the world never worked that way. It's a very recent phenomenon. So if we're talking about a shift from unipolarity to multipolarity, that's one thing. There we're talking about nations, really. But when we talk about cultures, about people, the way they behave, and they determine ultimately how politics is going to work out. Cultural change you cannot decree. You cannot pass laws and say, this is the way we're going to think about the world and about our relationships. That takes time. So this becomes a problem which I'm very concerned with personally, which concerns the media and education, the different means through which our shared ideas are constructed. And I think there's a lot of work to do, but the challenge of knowing that that a major shift is taking place in the world means that we have to begin addressing these issues. And I'd like to see them addressed not just at the political level or geopolitical level, but at the level of human communication, which means at the basic level, education at all levels of education, and the media, which are now the transmitters of everything we're supposed to believe in. Would you? I don't know how that what impact that would have on policy making itself. But do you perceive that as an issue?
Well, if you begin with the presumption, which is very strong, that certain cultures are superior to other cultures, then the stronger culture would always want to shape the culture of others to what it thinks is acceptable, modern, humanistic. So that problem will continue, and it's a big issue between the Western world and the Islamic world, or the Christian world and the Islamic world, if you like, and a big issue between the Christian Islamic world and our world, the Hindu world, the Buddhist world somewhat less, but certainly the Hindu world. But then is it possible for societies which have reached a certain level of development and what they think is and prosperity and comfort and everything that they think enriches life, are they willing to accept that another culture is at the same level or not, or whether it needs to be modernized and to be aligned with their own culture? Hence, therefore, these enormous pressures that come from the democracy promotion, because when you say democracy promotion, you're actually talking about the relationship between individual and society. You're talking about individualism. And there are civilizations in the East which don't quite look at the relationship between society and individual in the same way. But then this is looked upon as suppressing human freedom, curbing the épanouissement of an individual and stuff like that. And in our case, or in other cases, many of the rituals and beliefs and practices are seen as superstitious, as of a bygone age, and restrictive in terms of individual, I won't say freedom, but the development of the individual. And all these things come around patriarchy and women's rights and stuff like that. I mean, you go to Afghanistan and talk about patriarchy and women's rights. I don't know what reaction you're going to get. So I think these, and then at a certain level, because of the social media, American culture especially has become very widespread in terms of how it influences thinking, because there's instant communication. One idea that is developed in an American university then begins to filter through our universities here. So if there's wokeism there, there's wokeism here. And it is really destroying. It is destroying the society because the issues are not the same. But then wokeism has become very fashionable and stuff like that. So I think, in India, of course, we are not perfect. No society is perfect. But we have certain advantages in terms of how we relate to each other in society. First of all, it's a hugely diverse society with God knows how many languages and dialects. And religious practices, or maybe under the broad framework of Hinduism, are very different. And there's a plethora of gods and goddesses, which may get interlinked in philosophical terms, but for an individual, he's praying to a particular god who may be the incarnation of another god and stuff like that. What I mean is, and there's complete tolerance. There's no schism. There's no schism in Hinduism. There have been no religious wars in Hinduism. In fact, Islam brought wars into India, but there is no schism of that kind, no wars, no conflicts. So the idea of let and live and let live, and accept diversity, and leave people to do what they want in terms of their religious beliefs and practices has, in a sense, been very powerful in Indian society. And this mindset, frankly, we may be criticized for this, that reason, but we project this mindset globally and internationally. This is our mindset.
Yes.
We believe in diversity, we believe in differences and tolerance of differences, and live and let live. And in a very philosophical way, although mind you, you can't translate philosophy always into real life behavior. We do say that all the world is a family. There's a famous Sanskrit saying, which our prime minister quoted even to the US Congress, or I think so. Yes, he did. But there it is. So by nature, culturally, we are accommodative. We are not dominating. And that is something which we can bring to the international community if and when we have the capacity to shape global culture.
Well, that's what I was referring to when I said we're undergoing a visible shift that people recognize. They're talking about it in the distribution of power, but it's not just economic power. It's not just political power, military power. It's also there's a cultural dimension to it. I believe personally that we can exploit that, and by becoming more multipolar in our cultural thinking or cultural awareness, we can begin to understand that there are answers or alternatives to the kinds of ideologies that so freely circulate and seem so seductive to a lot of people, and most of which do come from the West. But we only have a few minutes left. I wanted to get your quick reaction to a couple of things that appeared in the news in the last week or so. The first thing is Macron's overture to BRICS.
Mm.
He is requested to attend the next BRICS meeting.
Mm.
What does that mean for you? What is that?
I think it was not a very well thought out initiative. And Russia has very strongly opposed it, and put South Africa in a very difficult situation. Mind you, the country that holds the chairmanship has the prerogative to invite other countries. But normally what you do is you invite the countries within your own orbit. I mean, if it is China, it will invite Central Asia or neighboring countries. If India will invite neighboring countries, or further afield in West Asia, as we say, Egypt or this or that, because there is a certain degree of community of relation. How would I say? There are objective reasons for this. Now, South Africa and France don't have any particular reason to promote. I'll put it differently. There's no particular reason why France should be present in a BRICS conference in South Africa, assuming that a West African country was a member of BRICS. Then yes, Macron could be invited. Even if India was to be the chair and decided to invite Macron, it would make sense because of very, very strong ties with France. But South Africa doesn't make sense. I think that a couple of reasons, 2-3 reasons. One, that France is losing its position in Africa. It's getting eroded. Therefore, they want to come back into Africa. And South Africa is a very major country, number one. Number two, there is great fear in the West that in the context of all that we've been talking about, multipolarity and this and that, that BRICS is the building block of a multipolar world, because in addition to the 5 countries, now there are about 8 or 9 countries or 12 countries which are actually wanting to join BRICS, as far as Argentina. Actually, officially, it has made an application to join BRICS. So the concern is that the world is slipping from our hands. And we must try and do something and come back into the game ourselves so that we don't get excluded. That is the second motive. The third is that it's part of the Ukraine conflict and Russia, because Russia was the originator of the BRICS conflict, and along with China now actually are the two, is a potent force, and Russia has been very active in Africa, and therefore to put a foot in that door, targeting the extension of Russia power and acceptance. So gum up the works, if you like, if you can. And finally, and there, if I was in India and I was chairing the summit, I would gladly invite Macron, because all said and done, France is not an outlier in NATO or European security discussion, but nevertheless, it has a view of its own. After all, didn't join the Iraq war and what have you.
And it goes back to de Gaulle as
and
well.
go right back to de Gaulle. Therefore, if France was to join hands, like in the case of the non-aligned movement, Yugoslavia became part of the non-aligned movement, although it was a European country, a Balkan country, but it had a certain ideology and thinking, and it wanted to be neutral. So France is not quite neutral, and is a member of NATO and everything else. Nevertheless, it has this image of a country that believes in strategic autonomy, and therefore, if you could legitimately draw it in, and in a sense strengthen BRICS as an alternative way of looking at the world and governing the world and integrating and cooperating with each other, and this time with a major European country.
Yeah.
But Macron's own policies, frankly, we are sitting far away, and I don't want to be critical, but Macron is very, very severe on Russia, very severe. They're arming Ukraine. They have imposed sanctions. They are party to more and more sanctions. Yeah. So,
but he tried to play it both ways for a while.
Yeah, for a while, but not convincingly and persuasively enough, which explains Russia's reaction. Is very severe. So I think in that sense, it would be a bit of a diplomatic snub that he tried to reach out and failed.
And could he be doing it for internal political reasons, because he's got a lot of problems governing? Does the idea that if he makes an impact in international relations, at least as far as the media are willing to repeat it, it puts him in a stronger, more comfortable position as a politician, as the leader of the country? Could that be?
I doubt it. I think he will be very severely criticized. The Americans will be livid that everybody sees in the West what the BRICS is up to, and China especially. It wants many of its own supporters to come into BRICS. They want to create an alternative world, which they will dominate more and more since Russia is becoming weak. So the Americans will say, what the hell are you up to? I mean, you are actually undermining the power and influence of the Western world in the global system, and with no assured gains, number one. Number two, whatever you may do, you will never be fully accepted either by Russia or by China. Therefore, you would be you will not be able to exert your influence within that system. And then, to my mind, for a country like France, with its history and its stature, to be an invitee is not good enough. It has to be a member.
Yes.
A true and honest member. But invitee means that today has been invited, next time it won't be invited. So,
I'd just like to ask you one last question. We've gone past the hour we agreed upon. Another event, a sequence of events that took place this week. You had Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, in China, trying to patch up a tense relationship, with reports that he had achieved his goal of showing that the dialogue was possible. He comes back and Biden immediately in public calls Xi a dictator, this leads to a diplomatic incident, which ends up being a démarche. How do you see this? Is this just a comic episode, or is this significant?
A couple of things. You know, the Americans want to pursue what they think is the right policy for them vis-a-vis China: competition, cooperation, confrontation. This is not what China accepts, because they say, if you're going to confront us potentially in Taiwan, and through the process of competition, you're going to deny us technologies, as America is now determined to do, then we don't feel that we need to cooperate with you, because these three things are interlinked. We can cooperate with you, provided also you are more reasonable with us on the other two, in the other two areas. So the respective weight of cooperation, competition, and confrontation within this policy matrix is not clear. That is one. The other is that the Americans do not want a conflict with China. So they are trying their very best to deter United States, China, from doing something rash in Taiwan. But they are caught in between two wickets, because if they bolster Taiwan too much, give them too many arms and technologies and this and that, that will provoke China further. If they don't do that, then Taiwan remains vulnerable. So they can't make up their mind whether they should. Well, I mean, when I say they can't make up their mind, what I mean is, in reality, whether it is one China or not one China. At the formal level, it's one China. But when Nancy Pelosi goes there and McCarthy goes there, then clearly it's not one China. No. And they say that we are committed to the defense of Taiwan also, which means it's not one China. So they want to postpone the thing, keep deterring China, and hopefully see if there can be a peaceful solution of some kind. And the Chinese keep repeating, there's no question. If necessary, we will invade Taiwan, and we will find a military solution. That's one. The other is that now they realize they can't decouple from China. Janet Yellen says that. The other leaders say that. Biden himself says that, because with the 700 and God knows how many $1 billion of trade, how can they decouple? Now they talk of de-risking, which means that in sensitive areas where we are dependent on China, there we will de-link ourselves. But for the rest of the thing, we'll carry on as before. So there are certain inherent weaknesses and contradictions in US policy towards China, and they don't know how to handle it. And in the meantime, China is becoming more and more powerful. And they are acting as the emperors of the past, where Blinken goes and says, our two militaries should talk. And the Chinese says, no, they won't talk. No, please talk. They say, no, we won't talk. But look at it. The most powerful country in the world wants to have a military dialogue with China, which China refuses. Look at the power that China has acquired for itself vis-a-vis the United States of America. So I'm afraid Blinken's visit was just to keep the channels of communication open, which China would also want, because they are mortified at the prospect of sanctions being imposed on them, as they have been imposed on Russia, because they're very vulnerable. Russia has all the natural resources it wants. It has oil, it has gas, it has water, it has wheat, food, everything, fertilizer, nuclear energy. China is vulnerable. Their entire economy more or less depends on the export market and everything else, and openness to the world. So if they are sanctioned, they can be in trouble. So they have their weaknesses too, but their posture always is that you come to me and I'll grant you your wishes, that kind of thing. And America, to my mind, loses a little bit of prestige by the kind of approach that they have towards China, that we want to come, we want to talk to you. Biden wants to talk to you. She says, I won't talk to you. This has happened also. He's not to the telephone, and Biden has himself said that she has not responded. He's not coming to the telephone. But America may feel that it is so strong that it can show a certain degree of humility, knowing that it has great strength behind it. But I'm not too sure.
So how serious is a démarche? Because that's the latest act.
No. Because Xi Jinping is a dictator. You look at the constitution of the CCP. It itself, the constitution says that China is a democratic dictatorship.
Yeah.
So I mean, what are they protesting about?
Dictatorship of the party, not of Xi himself.
No. When they say the party is the democratic dictatorship is in the constitution, then the person who's heading that country is a dictatorship. He calls himself a democratic dictator. He's a dictator. Now they're saying we are a whole process democracy, whatever that means. They are a dictator. Look at the way in which he has grasped all power within the system, given himself a third term, put all his cronies into the Politburo, the manner in which he handled COVID, total disregard for the society, and then completely changed track. This is dictatorship. What else is it?
Yeah. No, I'm not contesting that. I'm just saying that the idea of a diplomatic incident, because of the word you used, it has its own history. There have been cases in the past, at least in a Marx Brothers film.
I think the Chinese are making a fool of themselves by trying to make a démarche and their foreign office protesting. This is neither here nor there. It's the earlier wolf warrior diplomacy. Anything negative about China and their ambassadors will lash out, including the Chinese ambassador to France.
But should Biden have avoided saying that, even if you agree that it's...
Well, he said it indirectly, because I saw this, he gave a long speech somewhere. And in the course of the speech, there's a paragraph which says that there was this balloon episode, and we shot it down, and she did not know about it. But this is what happens in dictatorships when the information is not given to the leaders.
All right. Okay.
He didn't call him just bluntly a dictator.
Right.
It was talking about the channels of communication in a system like that, where the man at the top, and he absolved him, saying that he didn't know. But then he said, this is what happens in dictatorship.
Yeah.
He said it in that sense.
But would a cleverer politician have avoided that? Because people complain that Biden is prone to gaffes.
Yes, he is. Of course he is. That is quite visible, and we've seen many instances where he mixes up names of countries, formal occasions, and this and that. So anyway.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Unless there's any concluding remark you want to make, this was a fascinating conversation.
No, thank you very much. It was most interesting, and you let me talk as much as I wanted to without interrupting me, and ask me all the right questions and framed your thoughts in a way that gave me an opportunity to express myself.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.